Assalamu alaikum children. Today we have come to the end part of the chapter 6, biological processes in human body. So I divided this entire chapter into three parts, 6.1, 6.2 and 6.3. 6.1 included the digestive system and the respiratory system, and then 6.2 included the excretory system and the blood circulatory systems, and now finally 6.3, the final system that we'll be learning today is coordination and homeostasis in human body, right? Okay, now in order to learn about coordination and human homeostasis, first of all you all need to understand the term stimulus. We have already discussed about this. Stimulus is basically a change that takes place in the external environment, which is detected by the sensory organs in our body. This change in the external environment could be anything, but it has to be something that is detectable by the sensory organs. So it could be a light, which can be seen with our sensory organ eye. It could be a kind of a noise, which could be sensed by our ears. Then it could be some kind of a different taste, which could be sensed by our tongue. Or it could be a change in the temperature, like feeling cold or warm, which could be sensed by our skin. So any of these changes that's going to take place in the external environment is known as a stimulus, right? So organisms have the ability to respond to these stimuli, and that is known as irritability. So these responses to stimuli take place because the body has been adapted to change according to the changes in the external and internal environment. And so this is known as coordination. The ability to respond by adapting your body according to the changes of external and internal environment is known as coordination, right? Okay. Sensory organs in our body which can detect these stimuli. Example, the eye, nose, ear, tongue, and skin, right? Okay. So the reaction for a stimulus is known as response, right? Okay. So there are set of organs in our body or parts in our body that that does this function of response, right? Just keep this in mind. The organs that detect stimuli are known as receptors. Here's the name. They are known as receptors. So what are the receptors? The sensory organs. And then the organs which have the ability to respond to a stimulus are known as effectors. So what are the organs that act as effectors? Now let's move on to nervous coordination. So as I have already told you, nervous coordination is done by the nervous system of the human body. So what is the nervous system of the human body made up of? You have learned this in chapter 1. We learned about the nervous tissue. So the basic structural unit of a nervous system is the neuron. This is something you learned in chapter 1. You learned the structure of a neuron, its parts and everything. Therefore, large number of neurons will make up the nervous system. And so what does a neuron do? A neuron will transmit impulses. So how does that happen? A transmission of an impulse happens through an electrochemical change. So why is it called as an electrochemical change in the nerves? That is because when you want to transmit impulses, the nerves have to generate an electric potential. So this generated electric potential will therefore flow along the nerve from one nerve to another. Other than that, there's also a release of certain chemical substances from these nerves in order to carry this process of transmission of impulses. Therefore, transmission of impulses through nerves takes place due to an electrochemical change in the nerves. And this ensures a proper coordination between the receptors and effectors. Right? Okay. So we have learned about 3 types of neurons in the nervous system: the sensory neuron, the motor neuron, and the interneuron. Right? Now, just have a look at this flow chart of the nervous system. The nervous system is mainly made up of, like, it can be divided into two major parts. First one, the nervous system can be divided into 2 major parts: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Right? Okay. Now let's move on to the peripheral nervous system. So the peripheral nervous system includes the nerves arising from the brain and the spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system includes the nerves arising from the brain and the spinal cord. So the nerves arising from the brain are known as cranial nerves. There are 12 pairs on either side, and the nerves arising from the spinal cord are known as spinal nerves. There are 31 pairs. Right. Now let's look at the neurons. Now you will have to go back to your chapter 1, page number 16, and a detail is given regarding these 3 types of neurons. First, we learned about the sensory neuron. Here it's depicted in this picture. Here is the sensory neuron. And I'm sure you must be able to identify the parts of it. Here is the cell body. You can see the cell body here. Since there are 3 neurons here, there are 3 cell bodies. And then the tail-like thing that arises from the cell body is known as the axon. And then the cell body branches further to form dendrons and dendrites. These are the parts. And then around the axon, you get a lipid layer called the myelin sheath. You can see them rolled around the axon. And in between these myelin sheath, you get the node of Ranvier. So we have learned about each of these parts and their functions. Right. Now, if we look into the function of each of the neurons, the sensory neuron transmits impulses from sensory organ to the central nervous system. So what is the central nervous system? It is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. So the function of the sensory organ is to transmit impulses from the sensory organ to the central nervous system, right? So the cell body, this part, the cell body of the sensory neuron is present at the center of the nerve fibers. If you take this entire thing as the nerve fiber, if you take this entire thing as the nerve fiber, you can see that the cell body is found at the center of the nerve fiber. And these dendrites are present at the sensory organ. So you might find a sensory organ here, right? An eye or ear or anything, skin. So this part should be attached to a sensory organ. Right, now we move on to motor neuron, this one. So if you look at motor neuron, the function of the motor neuron is to transmit impulses from the central nervous system to the effector. So what are effectors? It's either a gland or a muscle. So it has to be here. It's either a gland or a muscle, right? So we know that the sensory nervous system will transmit impulses from the sensory organ to the central nervous system, while the motor neuron carries impulses from the central nervous system to the effectors, right? So a motor neuron possesses star-shaped cell body. Yes, you can see the difference between the cell bodies of the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. It has a star-shaped cell body. And its axon is much longer than that of the sensory neuron. Right? So the cell body is found within the central nervous system. Right? So it can be found inside the central nervous system. Now we are moving on to the final type of neuron, which is the interneuron. As the name suggests, it's an interneuron. It's between two things. So it is the entire neuron, not just part of it. The entire interneuron is found within the central nervous system. Just remember that, okay? In the motor neuron, the cell body part is found inside the central nervous system. In this case, the entire neuron is found within the central nervous system. The axons are short and there are many dendrites over here, as you can see. So the function of an interneuron is to connect a sensory neuron with a motor neuron. Yes, that's quite well explained in this picture. So that those are the major things about the three types of neurons.